Welcome to this podcast from the Medical Journal of Australia. My name is Sam Hunt, the MJA's News and Online Editor. Today we're discussing careers in medicine and where a career as a doctor can take you. Today we'll speak with Anna Samecki from Sydney, who studied her medical degree at the University of Notre Dame, Australia, before becoming a general practitioner and later a medical advisor. Dr Samecki is now the Medical Education and Publications Lead for the pharmaceutical firm Boehringer Ingelheim in Sydney. Dr Samecki, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me and inviting me along. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr Samecki, let's start by talking about how your career began and when you started thinking about a career outside of clinical practice.
I think I started thinking about a potential career outside of medicine back as a GP registrar, if I'm being honest. So it's a bit of a long time ago now. But that's probably because, as many would know, life as a doctor can be quite challenging with long hours and variable work-life balance. And so after a few years of working in the healthcare system, like naturally any doctor, I found myself wondering, is this something that I want to continue, or is there something out there, something different for me that I could be doing? So during GP training, look, I was pretty lucky. I was afforded an opportunity that not many are afforded, and that was to take up an extended skills term in a non-clinical role. And I chose to apply for something called an academic post. Basically, this is a funded part-time position that allows GP registrars to learn about academia through work experience. So over the next 12 months, when I started the post, I found myself in a position where I was working 2 days as a GP reg and 2 days at the old uni where I used to be a medical student. So it was a bit of a full circle moment. But while I was at the university, I taught problem-based learning, I taught clinical skills tutorial, and I undertook some general practice research. And quite quickly, I realised I was not much of a researcher. I don't think that's a bad thing, though. At least I gave it a go. But I really, really enjoyed the teaching. So much so that I actually asked the uni to extend my contract with them after the post ended. And the rest is history. I mean, I continued to teach part-time there over a period of 5 to 6 years. So I then divided my time between GP work and teaching. And what I found in dividing my time between this clinical and non-clinical role is that it actually gave me the mental break I needed from clinical medicine, meaning I would come back feeling more refreshed and better able to take on the workload. But it also afforded me the opportunity to continue to sort of develop and grow those skills in non-clinical medicine, but also develop networks and find other people in similar roles. So that played in my favor, as we'll soon find out.
And Dr Samecki, you've had a variety of roles, including non-clinical roles. Let's talk first about those roles. What kind of roles have you had?
Yeah, so look, I've touched on the teaching role that I took on as a reg, but I would like to just say that, that decision to take on a challenge, something new, is probably what opened the door for me to explore other non-clinical roles in the first place. And some of those include, working as a medical writer, as a med advisor, and even as a GP journalist, to name a few. But to paint a bit of a chronological picture of my career path for our listeners, I guess after I finished the academic post and obtained fellowship, I also had the capacity and the opportunity to take on a medical writing role for an organisation called Health Pathways, which, for those who don't know, is an online information portal for GPs to use at the point of care. So that opportunity was told to me by a friend, and it was also advertised through the local health district. And thankfully, with sort of that year of academic experience under my belt, I decided to give it a go. And I ended up doing that role on a casual basis for about 5 years. Now, it required a variety of skills, and while I certainly did not tick all the boxes, let me be clear, I don't believe I ticked all the boxes. I definitely had enough experience in the main skills needed, such as good oral and written communication skills, as well as an ability to translate evidence into practice. And then once I was in that role, the team were incredibly supportive in helping me develop skills in other areas, and that includes things like internal and external stakeholder engagement and so forth. So you could say I learnt quite a bit on the job. Fast forward a couple of years, and by that stage, I'd been working clinically 2 days as a GP, 2 days as a tutor at the uni, and then had that day in between for writing and editing. But as we all know, life happens. Family life brings about a whole new set of challenges. And so, after a period of absence from work, I came back wanting something different. I wasn't ready to go back to juggling so many different roles and hats anymore. I wanted stability. That's what I craved. And so, what? I discovered something called LinkedIn, which surprisingly many doctors still don't use, which is a real shame. But I set up a profile. I had a look around, and you know what? I found a job advert for a role termed a medical advisor role at an organization called MPS Medicine Wise, which sadly no longer exists, and I'm still still reeling from that decision, but it is what it is. But at the time, I saw it as a massive opportunity to take the next step in my non-clinical career, I should say, and it would also simplify the number of hats I would wear at the time. Um, Looking back, I would say the biggest hurdle was actually not the job itself; it was actually my own self-confidence, because I remember looking at the list of key responsibilities in the job advert, which included the usual suspects, such as, provide expert clinical input on practice. But there are also things around medical leadership. Again, key opinion leader and stakeholder engagement was another one. Input into the development of clinical governance and quality improvement processes. And I remember this one distinctly because there was a point on acting as a media spokesperson and an external representative, something which I definitely did not have experience in. But you know what? I remember thinking, they're not going to hire me. What am I doing? I'm a new fellow. Should I even go for this job? But I think having had that career break afforded me a bit of, let's say, courage. So I applied, and it's a happy ending. And yes, I landed the role, even though I didn't tick all the boxes. But I guess what I'm trying to say is I demonstrated I had enough transferable skills and the ability and capacity to learn. And with the right support, they saw that in me and they hired me. But again, life is full of curveballs. And once I had the role, I must admit, it was actually quite different to what I imagined, but in a good way. Every day was different. Some days I'd sit in meetings, provide my clinical input on a variety of topics. Other days I'd review reports for various stakeholders like the Department of Health. Sometimes I'd be called upon last minute to do a media interview, and there was a whole lot of stuff in between. But I guess, yeah, what I'm saying is if I had not taken the risk, I probably wouldn't have been in a position to have that opportunity and to obtain all these new skills. And I actually do credit that role as being pivotal to progressing my career in non-clinical medicine.
Very interesting experience there. And how hard is it to land these roles? For example, are there any roles you wanted but didn't get?
I will say it can be a challenge, but the same can be said of actual clinical roles, right? I mean, I remember distinctly interviewing for basic physician training positions a long, long time ago, and that in itself was quite a grueling process. So, whether it's a clinical or non clinical role, I think there are challenges in both. But if I was to compare the process between what it's like to recruit for a clinical versus a non clinical role, I would probably say position descriptions are everything. And that's why LinkedIn's great, because a lot of the time they do link to a position description. And so that really helps you gain an understanding of what kind of candidate the organization is looking for and what skills you need to have, or what skills you need to demonstrate that you have the capacity to develop with support. A recruiter can actually be quite helpful here, and that's also why LinkedIn's quite helpful, because they do have recruiters on there. And so, if you're brand new to non-clinical roles and unsure, they're a good touch point. But then there's the interview process, and often it isn't just one interview in the non-clinical setting, but usually a series of two or three with multiple panel members. They usually like to ask different types of skill-based questions and occasionally throw in a problem-solving one where they might give you a problem or issue beforehand, and then you have to go off, do your homework, find a solution that you then have to present at the interview, which can be a little bit nerve-wracking, but it is something that can be quite common. Some places also do additional assessments such as psychometric testing, and I must admit I've never experienced that in a clinical role before, and I had to probably do this about 2 or 3 times, and the results are usually quite interesting. And I must admit I don't think my results were the same when I did the two different tests. But look, one thing that certainly is the same between clinical and non-clinical is that you win some and you lose some, right? And absolutely, I'll be the first to admit I have gone for more non clinical roles than I have landed, that's for sure. And I've certainly missed out on at least two, which I really, really wanted. One was a leadership role in medical education, and another one was an advisor type role in the private sector. But on the flip side, you might find yourself in a position where you've got multiple roles offers as well. So I do recall having to turn down a role in the department to take another, which was a tough call, but I think I made the right choice at the time. I guess we'll see.
And now you're in the pharmaceutical industry. How did you feel about the pharmaceuticals industry before, when you were working as a GP, compared to now?
Oh, gee, Sam, you do ask the tough questions, don't you? Again, I won't shy away from this one. I will say that I probably didn't know much about pharma prior, even though I thought I did. And like most doctors, I was probably exposed to some transferred biases from other colleagues and previous supervisors I had worked with. So I did develop a bit of a suspicion towards pharma, the pharma industry early on. I also, on reflection, never really had any formal teaching about what the pharma industry actually does as a med student or junior doctor. So, it's always a bit hard to understand something that you don't really know, besides the occasional exposure to a drug rep. But now, since moving into pharma, and also, since the pandemic, I think a lot of doctors would have seen a change in attitudes towards pharma since the pandemic. But I've really expanded my understanding of what it takes to get a medicine from bench to bedside. And it is definitely a very regulated, compliant, and as we know, a pretty long process, but I guess it has to be to ensure the safety of patients and the public. Because the work of industry doesn't just impact one or two patients, it impacts thousands, if not millions of patients, which is a big responsibility. And look, I'm a sucker for a pun, but sometimes it's not an easy pill to swallow. Another thing that I definitely didn't know prior to my current role is just how much is invested in research and education. And that includes things like grants, sponsorships, and even patient advocacy by industry. So I do feel quite lucky in my current role, because my current role sits in medical affairs, and my role is really about identifying what non promotional medical activities and initiatives can help meet the needs of healthcare professionals. I guess I do a lot of work around understanding current clinical practice gaps and unmet needs, listening to what doctors need. And with my team, we try and work out a plan forward. So, sure, it can be quite challenging, especially because the perfectionist in me would like to solve everybody's problems. But in reality, you can only do so much, and you can only do what you've got resources for. So I try to focus on the things I can change.
And let's take a step back. What prompted your move into the pharma industry?
Another tough one. I guess looking back, I mentioned I had worked or had been working at MPS Medicine Wise for a few years, which some of the audience will know was a not for profit evidence based organization that was committed to the quality use of medicines. So I had about 2 years of QUM experience under my belt by the time it was defunded. And with that, having focused on medicines for 2 years, a move to industry almost felt like a bit of a natural next step. But I'd never had any pharma industry experience. So that was sort of the big elephant in the room. So that was a challenge. But I guess I also craved to learn more. I wanted to learn more about business. As doctors, you learn medicine, but no one really teaches you about money or business. You kind of have to learn that for yourself. And I also wanted to learn a little bit more about the private sector, because it's something I just never experienced before. And I also knew that any new skills obtained in industry would definitely be transferable to a much wider range of future roles, whether that be within industry itself or outside of it. So I guess that's probably the reason for a move in a nutshell.
And what advice do you have for any health professionals considering a move into non-clinical medicine? How can they make that switch?
Look, I think everyone's journey is a little bit different, so it will be different for each person. But if I was to put it down to one thing initially, I'd say one of my biggest hurdles, and I think one of the biggest hurdles for the audience, is your own mindset. And I still struggle with this sometimes. So that is, to put it in sort of one sentence, as a healthcare professional, we have trained for a long time. We've trained very hard to get to where we are. it can almost feel a bit like a cop-out or a waste if we're not working clinically, and I struggle with that degree of, what am I doing? But having said that, one of the ways I try to overcome that is through perspective. So all that medical knowledge gained still has to go somewhere, and it goes towards something, even in non-clinical roles. And in fact, medical training is essential for a lot of them. Like, you're not just applying what you're doing is you're just applying that knowledge in a different way. So in my role, I believe I'm still helping patients, even if it's indirectly, and the work we do impacts many more patients than I could ever dream of, seeing in person, one to one, if that makes sense. In terms of advice, I guess my advice to anyone listening that's considering a non-clinical role is, number one would be network and talk to other doctors. There is a huge network of doctors out there working in non-clinical roles. You'll find them online, on Facebook groups, you'll find them on LinkedIn. Find out what others are doing, maybe even get a mentor and see if they're doing anything that sparks an interest. And if so, find out what it is that you need to get there. I've mentioned LinkedIn a few times, but join LinkedIn if you haven't and set up a profile. It's pretty easy. If you've got Facebook and Instagram, which most doctors will do, LinkedIn's a walk in the park. Even just looking up advertised non-clinical roles and just looking at the position description can be quite useful to understand what is required of different roles. I've mentioned it and touched on before, but consider speaking to a recruiter. Again, they can be found on LinkedIn. Or alternatively, there are career development professionals now, and there's some doctors or ex-doctors that have set up companies, or they specialize in sort of non-clinical career development as well. So something to look out for and watch out for. And of course, one big thing, the GP in me is still in there somewhere, and it screams, this message: if you're struggling with your current role, make sure you do speak to your healthcare professional, such as a trusted GP, if you're feeling burnt out and need additional support. So that's number one. Another piece of advice, my second piece of advice, would be to upskill and find opportunities to learn something new. That includes things, like short courses or going to conferences in areas of interest, or go bold and enroll in that MBA you've been eyeing off for a while if you've got capacity to do it amongst all the million other things you're doing. You might want to just consider alternative ways of learning, whether that's being online, part-time, night classes. There's plenty of options. Again, speaking to doctors that have done it before or have walked the walk, that might help you navigate what you want to do and actually help you decide if you're going to go and do it. And again, I mentioned position descriptions, but they're helpful in also maybe planning for the future. So if you don't have particular skills for a job you want, you can make that personal plan for yourself. And last but not least, have a crack and have a go. Don't be afraid to give it a shot. There are actually plenty of non-clinical roles out there if you just look. Interestingly, many can actually be done part-time. So it allows doctors to work within clinical medicine if they don't want to give that up completely. And in my own personal experience, I can say, rest assured, even if it doesn't work out, there's plenty of things that haven't worked out in my career. The process of trying still provides so much experience to learn and draw from. And then when you do finally land that role you've wanted, not only could it be the change you need, but it can be a catalyst for something bigger down the line. So take the leap and take a chance.
Dr. Samecki, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Anna Samecki is a medical doctor and the Medical Education and Publications Lead at Boehringer Ingelheim in Sydney. And we've been discussing careers in medicine and where a career as a doctor can take you. You can find more podcasts on our website at mja.com.au or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening.